scorching sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of Dustwood, a forgotten town where tumbleweeds outnumbered honest folk. Cowman pulled his weathered hat low over his eyes as he rode through the outskirts, his horse's hooves kicking up clouds of red dirt. At 43, he'd learned that minding his own business kept a man alive longer in these parts, but fate had other plans. The old Hartwell barn stood abandoned on the edge of town, its rotting wood a testament to dreams long dead. Cowman had stopped only to water his horse at the nearby creek when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost dismissed it as wind through broken boards. But there it was again, a soft whimper, barely human. His hand instinctively moved to his Colt .45 as he approached the barn. The massive doors hung askew, revealing nothing but shadows within. Cowman had survived this long by trusting his instincts, and right now, every fiber of his being screamed danger. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing in the emptiness. The whimpering stopped. Cowman stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through gaps in the roof. What he saw made his blood run cold. In the far corner, chained to a support beam like an animal, sat a boy no older than 10. The child's clothes were torn and filthy, his face gaunt from hunger and dehydration. "Jesus Christ," Cowman whispered, holstering his weapon and rushing forward. The boy looked up with eyes that held too much pain for someone so young. He tried to speak, but only a croak emerged from his parched throat. Heavy iron shackles bound his wrists and ankles, the metal having rubbed his skin raw. "Easy there, son," Cowman said gently, kneeling beside the child. "I'm gonna get you out of here." As he examined the chains, Cowman noticed something that made his stomach churn. These weren't rusty old shackles. They were new, well-maintained. Someone had put considerable effort into keeping this boy imprisoned. "What's your name, kid?" Cowman asked, pulling a water canteen from his belt. The boy drank greedily before managing to whisper, "Tommy Hartwell." Hartwell. The name hit Cowman like a punch to the gut. Everyone in Dustwood knew the story of the Hartwell family, how they'd owned the biggest ranch in the territory before mysterious circumstances forced them to sell everything to Mayor Blackwood. The family had supposedly moved east, but here was young Tommy, chained in what used to be his family's barn. "Where's your family, Tommy?" Cowman asked, though he dreaded the answer. The boy's eyes filled with tears. They're gone. The mayor said I had to stay here until someone came for me. But nobody ever comes." Cowman's jaw tightened. Mayor Blackwood was known for his iron grip on Dustwood, but this was beyond corruption. This was pure evil. He pulled out his lockpicks, a skill learned during his less honorable days, and began working on the shackles. "How long have you been here, son?" "I don't know. Weeks? Months? The man with the scar brings me food sometimes, but not much." The man with the scar. Cowman knew exactly who that was. Jake Morrison, Blackwood's right-hand man and the most feared gunslinger in 3 counties. If Morrison was involved, this went deeper than a simple kidnapping. The first shackle clicked open, and Tommy's eyes widened with hope. As Cowman worked on the second, he heard the unmistakable sound of approaching horses. Multiple riders moving fast. "Stay quiet," he whispered to Tommy, drawing his gun and moving to the barn door. Through a gap in the wood, he saw them. 5 men on horseback, led by Morrison himself. The scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw was clearly visible even at this distance. They were still a quarter-mile away, but closing fast. Cowman's mind raced. He could try to shoot it out, but 5 against 1 were poor odds, especially with a child to protect. He could try to hide, but they'd search the barn thoroughly. That left only one option: run. He quickly freed Tommy's remaining shackles and scooped the weak boy into his arms. "We're leaving, son. Right now." They slipped out the back of the barn just as Morrison's gang reached the front. Cowman's horse, trained for quick getaways, stood ready. He lifted Tommy onto the saddle and swung up behind him. "There, behind the barn." Morrison's voice boomed across the desert. Gunshots erupted as Cowman spurred his horse into a gallop. Bullets whined past their heads, but his mount was fast and sure-footed. They raced across the scrubland, using every gully and rock formation for cover. Tommy clung to the saddle horn, his small body trembling with exhaustion and fear. "Where are we going?" he asked. "Somewhere safe," Cowman replied, though he wasn't sure such a place existed in Dustwood. As they rode, Cowman's mind churned with questions. Why was Tommy Hartwell being held prisoner? What had happened to his family? And most importantly, what was Mayor Blackwood trying to hide? The sun was setting as they reached Cowman's hidden camp in the foothills, a place known only to him, where he'd learned to survive on his own terms. It wasn't much, a small cave concealed by brush, with a clear spring nearby and good sight lines in all directions. Tommy was barely conscious as Cowman helped him down from the horse. The boy needed food, medical attention, and answers. But first, he needed safety. As Cowman built a small fire and heated some beans, Tommy spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "They killed them. My ma and pa. I saw it happen." The words hung in the air like smoke from the fire. Cowman felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a burning desire for justice. He'd spent so long running from his past, avoiding entanglements, that he'd forgotten what it felt like to care about something bigger than himself. "Tell me what happened, son," he said gently. But Tommy had fallen asleep, exhaustion finally claiming him. Cowman covered the boy with his own blanket and stared into the flames, knowing that his days of staying uninvolved were over. Whatever Mayor Blackwood was hiding, whatever had happened to the Hartwell family, Cowman was going to uncover the truth. In the distance, he could see the lights of Dustwood twinkling like fallen stars. Tomorrow, he would have to make a choice that would change everything. Tonight, he would plan. The game was about to begin, and Cowman intended to win. Dawn broke over the desert with the promise of another scorching day. Cowman had barely slept, his mind racing with plans and possibilities. Tommy stirred beside the dying embers of their fire, his young face peaceful for the first time since Cowman had found him. "Morning, son," Cowman said softly, offering the boy some hardtack and water. "How are you feeling?" Tommy sat up slowly, wincing as his raw wrists reminded him of his ordeal. "Better, I think. Thank you for saving me, mister." "Name's Cowman, just Cowman." He studied the boy's face in the morning light, noting the resemblance to old Samuel Hartwell, whom he'd known years ago. "Tommy, I need you to tell me everything you remember about what happened to your family. Can you do that?" The boy nodded, though his hands trembled slightly. "It was 3 months ago. Pa had been arguing with Mayor Blackwood about something. I heard them shouting in Pa's study late at night. Pa kept saying he wouldn't sell, that the land was ours by right." Cowman leaned forward. "What land?" "The silver mine. Pa found it last spring, up in Eagle's Peak. He said it was going to make us rich, that we'd never have to worry about money again." Tommy's voice grew smaller. "But then the mayor started coming around making offers. Pa always said no. A silver mine. That changed everything." Cowman knew that kind of wealth could drive men to murder, especially someone like Blackwood who already controlled most of Dustwood's businesses. "What happened the night they died?" Cowman asked gently. Tommy's eyes filled with tears, but he continued. "Men came to the house. Morrison and others. They said Pa had to sign some papers, that it was for his own good. When Pa refused, Morrison..." The boy's voice broke. "He shot Pa right there in the parlor. Ma screamed and then they killed her too." Cowman's hands clenched into fists. Cold-blooded murder, and for what? Money. Always money. They took me to the barn and chained me up. Morrison said I was insurance, that if anyone came asking questions, they'd need me alive to prove the Hartwells had just moved away. Tommy wiped his nose on his sleeve. But nobody ever came asking. That was the way of Dustwood. People minded their own business, even when their neighbors disappeared. It was easier than facing the truth about what their town had become. Tommy, do you know where your pa kept the deed to the mine? The boy's eyes brightened slightly. In his safe, behind the painting of Grandpa Hartwell. But the combination, you know it? Ma's birthday. Pa always used Ma's birthday for everything important. Cowman felt a spark of hope. If the deed still existed, it would be proof of Blackwood's motive for murder. But getting into the Hartwell house would be dangerous. Morrison's men were probably watching it. We need help, Cowman muttered, more to himself than to Tommy. There's Miss Sarah, Tommy said suddenly. She runs the schoolhouse. She was friends with Ma, and she never liked the mayor much. She might help us. Sarah Mitchell. Cowman knew her by reputation. A spinster schoolteacher who'd come to Dustwood 5 years ago and somehow managed to maintain her independence in a town where women were expected to know their place. If anyone could be trusted, it might be her. All right, son. Here's what we're gonna do. You're gonna stay here while I go into town. I need to talk to Miss Sarah and see what she knows. No. Tommy grabbed Cowman's arm. Don't leave me alone. What if they find me? Cowman saw the terror in the boy's eyes and felt his heart clench. Okay, we'll figure something else out. But before he could form a new plan, the sound of a single horse approaching made him reach for his gun. Through the brush he saw a lone rider, a woman in a simple brown dress, riding side saddle with the confidence of someone who'd grown up around horses. Sarah Mitchell. Cowman kept his weapon drawn but didn't reveal himself until she called out, "Mr. Cowman, I know you're there. I've come alone, and I want to help." Slowly, Cowman emerged from the cave, Tommy close behind him. Sarah's eyes widened when she saw the boy. "Dear God, Tommy Hartwell, we thought you were dead." She dismounted quickly and rushed to the boy, kneeling to examine his injured wrists. "What have they done to you?" "Miss Sarah." Tommy threw his arms around her, and she held him tight, tears streaming down her face. "How did you find us?" Cowman asked, still wary. "I saw you ride out yesterday with someone, on your horse. When Morrison's men came through town this morning asking if anyone had seen a stranger with a child, I put 2 and 2 together." She looked up at Cowman with fierce determination. "I've been waiting 3 months for someone to ask the right questions about the Hartwells." "You knew they were murdered?" "I suspected. The story never made sense. Samuel Hartwell loved this land too much to just up and leave. And when I went to their house the day after they supposedly left, I found this." She pulled a small object from her pocket, a silver locket that had belonged to Tommy's mother. "Ma's locket!" Tommy reached for it with trembling hands. "It was on the floor by the fireplace, like it had been torn off in a struggle," Sarah explained. "I've been carrying it ever since, hoping someday I'd have a chance to find out the truth." Cowman studied the schoolteacher's face. She had the look of someone who'd seen too much and decided to stop looking the other way. "What do you know about a silver mine?" Sarah's eyes sharpened. "So that's what this is about. I wondered why Blackwood suddenly had enough money to buy the old Jameson Ranch and expand the bank. Samuel mentioned finding something valuable on his land, but he was secretive about it. We need to get into the Hartwell house," Cowman said. "There's a safe with documents that could prove Blackwood's guilt. That's suicide. Morrison has men watching the place. Not if we create a distraction." Cowman's mind was already working. "What's the biggest event in Dustwood's social calendar?" Sarah thought for a moment. "The mayor's birthday celebration. It's this Saturday, 3 days from now. The whole town will be at the hotel for his party, including his men, most of them. Blackwood likes to show off his power, and that includes having his gunmen visible at social events. Cowman nodded slowly. Then that's when we make our move. But I'll need more than just the two of us. There are others, Sarah said quietly. People who've had enough of Blackwood's rule but were too afraid to speak up. The widow Peterson, whose husband died in a suspicious mining accident. Doc Holliday, who's been forced to falsify death certificates. Even Sheriff Williams has been asking quiet questions lately. Williams? Cowman was surprised. The sheriff had always seemed like Blackwood's lapdog. His own son was beaten by Morrison's men last month for asking too many questions about the Hartwells. Sometimes it takes something personal to open a man's eyes. For the first time since finding Tommy, Cowman felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe they weren't as alone as he'd thought. Maybe Dustwood still had some fight left in it. All right, Miss Sarah, if you're willing to risk it, we'll try to gather these people together. But they need to understand. Once we start this, there's no going back. Blackwood won't hesitate to kill anyone who threatens him. Sarah stood up, her jaw set with determination. Some things are worth dying for, Mr. Cowman, and some things are worth living for. She looked down at Tommy, who was clutching his mother's locket. This boy deserves justice for his parents, and this town deserves to be free of Blackwood's corruption. As they began planning their dangerous gambit, none of them noticed the figure watching from a distant ridge, one of Morrison's scouts, who'd been tracking Cowman since dawn. The game was indeed about to begin, but the stakes were higher than any of them realized. The mayor's birthday party would be more than a celebration. It would be a reckoning. Saturday evening arrived with an unseasonable chill that seemed to seep into the very bones of Dustwood. The Grand Hotel blazed with light as the town's elite gathered to celebrate Mayor Blackwood's 55th birthday. Inside, the sound of forced laughter and clinking glasses masked the tension that had been building all week. Cowman crouched in the shadows behind the Hartwell house, Tommy beside him and Sarah keeping watch from the schoolhouse across the street. The plan was simple in theory. While most of Morrison's men were at the party, they would break into the house, find the safe, and retrieve the mining deed. In practice, Cowman knew that simple plans rarely survived contact with reality. "Remember, son," he whispered to Tommy, "you stay right behind me. If something goes wrong, you run straight to Miss Sarah and don't look back." Tommy nodded, his small face pale but determined. The boy had shown remarkable courage over the past 3 days, and Cowman found himself growing more protective of him with each passing hour. They slipped through the back door of the Hartwell house, using a key that Sarah had somehow procured from the late Mrs. Hartwell's friend. The house felt like a tomb, furniture covered in dust sheets, family photographs still hanging on the walls as if waiting for their owners to return. In Samuel Hartwell's study, the painting of Tommy's grandfather hung exactly where the boy remembered. Behind it, the safe waited like a silent sentinel. Tommy whispered his mother's birthday, and the lock clicked open with surprising ease. Inside, Cowman found exactly what he'd hoped for, and much more than he'd expected. The mining deed was there, clearly establishing Samuel Hartwell's legal claim to the silver deposits on Eagle's Peak. But beneath it lay a stack of letters that made Cowman's blood run cold. They were correspondence between Mayor Blackwood and a mining consortium in Denver, detailing plans to forcibly acquire the Hartwell land through intimidation, legal manipulation, and, if necessary, elimination of the family. But the most shocking document was at the bottom of the stack, a birth certificate that changed everything. "Tommy," Cowman said slowly, "come here and look at this." The boy peered at the yellowed paper, struggling to read the formal script. "What is it?" "It's your birth certificate. But look at the father's name." Tommy's eyes widened as he read, "Father, Marcus Blackwood." Mother, Elizabeth Hartwell. I don't understand, Tommy whispered. Cowman's mind raced as the pieces fell into place. Your mother was married before she met Samuel Hartwell. She was married to Marcus Blackwood, the mayor. That makes you his son, Tommy finished, his voice barely audible. The revelation hit like a thunderbolt. Mayor Blackwood hadn't just murdered the Hartwells for their land. He'd murdered his own ex-wife and the man who'd raised his biological son. The level of evil was beyond anything Cowman had imagined. But why? Tommy asked, tears streaming down his face. Why would he do this to his own family? Before Cowman could answer, the sound of footsteps on the front porch made them both freeze. Multiple sets of boots, moving with military precision. Morrison's voice carried through the night air. Search every room. If they're here, I want them found. Cowman quickly stuffed the documents into his coat and grabbed Tommy's hand. They had seconds before the house would be swarming with gunmen. The back door was their only escape route. But as they reached the kitchen, they heard voices coming from that direction too. They were trapped. Cowman pulled Tommy into the pantry just as the front door burst open. Through a crack in the door, they watched Morrison enter with 3 other men, their guns drawn and ready. Spread out, Morrison ordered. Check every room, every closet, every hiding place. Blackwood wants this finished tonight. As the men began their systematic search, Cowman noticed something that made his heart sink. Muddy footprints leading directly to the study. Their tracks were clearly visible on the dusty floor. Morrison saw them too. Well, well, looks like our friends have been busy. He gestured to one of his men. Go get the mayor. Tell him we've found something interesting. Minutes that felt like hours passed before Mayor Blackwood arrived. Even through the pantry door, Cowman could see the man's imposing figure. Tall, well-dressed, with silver hair and cold blue eyes that missed nothing. What have you found, Jake? Blackwood's voice was cultured, educated, but with an underlying cruelty that made Cowman's skin crawl. Tracks leading to the study, and the safe's been opened. Whatever they were looking for, they probably found it. Blackwood's face darkened. Then we need to find them before they can use it. Double the search. Check every building in town if necessary. What about the boy? Morrison asked. What about him? Well, sir, if he really is that boy is nothing to me, Blackwood snapped with vicious finality. Elizabeth made her choice when she left me for that rancher. The child is just another loose end that needs tying up. Tommy's sharp intake of breath was barely audible, but in the tense silence, it sounded like a gunshot. Morrison's head snapped toward the pantry. Did you hear that? Cowman knew they had seconds before discovery. He burst from the pantry with Tommy in his arms, diving through the kitchen window in a shower of glass and wood. They hit the ground hard, rolled, and came up running. Gunshots erupted behind them as Morrison's men gave chase. Cowman zigzagged through the darkened streets, using every alley and shadow he knew. Tommy clung to him desperately, the boy's world shattered by the revelation of his true parentage. They reached the schoolhouse just as Sarah emerged with a rifle in her hands. "This way!" she shouted, leading them toward a hidden root cellar behind the building. But as they ran, Cowman realized they weren't alone. Sheriff Williams stepped out of the shadows, his own gun drawn. But it was pointed at Morrison's men, not at them. "That's far enough, Jake," Williams called out. Morrison skidded to a halt, his men flanking him. "Stay out of this, Sheriff. This is Mayor's business. Murder is my business," Williams replied firmly. "And I've heard enough tonight to know what really happened to the Hartwells." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Morrison's hand hovered over his gun while Williams kept his weapon steady. In the distance, Cowman could see other figures emerging from the shadows. Doc Holliday, Widow Peterson, and several other townspeople, all armed and grim-faced. "You're outnumbered, Jake," Williams said, "and the whole town's about to know the truth about what Blackwood's been doing." Morrison's scarred face twisted into a sneer. "You think these sheep have the courage to stand up to us? They've been hiding behind their doors for years." "Maybe," Williams admitted, "but some things change a man. Learning that your mayor murdered a family for money, including his own ex-wife and son, that's one of them." The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Around them, Cowman could see more townspeople gathering, drawn by the commotion and the rumors that had been spreading all week. The secret was out, and there was no putting it back. Morrison's hand moved toward his gun, but before he could draw, a voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Stand down, all of you." Mayor Blackwood strode into the street, flanked by more of his men. But something had changed in his demeanor. The mask of respectability had slipped, revealing the cold killer beneath. "So," he said, looking directly at Tommy, "my bastard son has returned from the dead. How inconvenient." The crowd gasped at the casual admission. Tommy stepped forward, his young voice carrying clearly in the night air. "You killed my ma and pa. You killed them for money." Blackwood shrugged. "I killed them because they were in my way, just like you're in my way now." The mayor's casual admission of murder sent a shockwave through the gathered townspeople. This was no longer about rumors or suspicions. This was a confession, delivered with chilling indifference. But Cowman noticed something else in Blackwood's eyes: desperation. The man was cornered, his carefully constructed empire crumbling around him. And desperate men were the most dangerous of all. The final confrontation was about to begin, and Cowman knew that not everyone would survive the night. "Hi, how are you? I'm interrupting quickly just to ask you to click on the like button and subscribe to the channel. This will help a lot. Thank you, and I hope you like the story." The main street of Dustwood had become an arena, with the entire town bearing witness to a confrontation that would determine its future. Lanterns and torches cast dancing shadows on the faces of people who had lived in fear for too long, while Mayor Blackwood stood at the center of it all like a cornered wolf. "You want the truth?" Blackwood's voice carried across the silent crowd. "Fine. I'll give you the truth. Yes, I killed Samuel and Elizabeth Hartwell. Yes, I've been bleeding this town dry for years. And yes, I'll kill anyone else who stands in my way." His casual admission sent ripples of shock through the gathered townspeople. Some gasped, others stepped back, but many, including Sheriff Williams and the growing group of armed citizens, stood their ground. Tommy stepped forward, his small frame dwarfed by the adults around him, but his voice clear and strong. "You're my father, but you're not my pa. Samuel Hartwell was my pa. He loved me, and you killed him." Blackwood's cold blue eyes fixed on the boy with something that might have been regret, but was more likely calculation. "You're right, boy. Samuel was more of a father to you than I ever was. But that doesn't change what needs to happen here." Morrison's hand inched toward his gun, but Sheriff Williams was ready. "Don't even think about it, Jake. This ends here tonight." "Does it?" Blackwood smiled coldly. "Look around you, Sheriff. I own this town. I own the bank, the hotel, the general store. Half the people standing here owe me money. You think they'll really stand against me when morning comes?" Cowman had heard enough. He stepped into the circle of light, the documents from the Hartwell safe in his hand. "Maybe they will when they see these." He held up the correspondence between Blackwood and the Denver Mining Consortium. "Letters detailing your plans to steal the Hartwell mine. Contracts showing how you've been selling off-town land to outside interests. Financial records proving you've been embezzling from the town treasury for years." The crowd murmured angrily as the scope of Blackwood's corruption became clear. Doc Holliday pushed forward, his medical bag in one hand and a shotgun in the other. "That explains a lot," the doctor said grimly. Like why you wanted me to falsify death certificates for miners who died in accidents. Like why you insisted on handling the Hartwell funeral arrangements personally, to make sure nobody looked too closely at the bodies. Widow Peterson stepped up beside him, her voice shaking with rage. My husband didn't die in an accident, did he? You had him killed because he found out about the mine. And my boy, Sheriff Williams added, his gun never wavering from Morrison. He was beaten because he was asking questions about the Hartwells. You ordered that, didn't you? Blackwood's composure was cracking. You people are nothing. Sheep. You've been content to let me run this town because you were too weak to do it yourselves. Maybe we were, Sarah Mitchell said, stepping out of the crowd with her rifle. But we're not anymore. The schoolteacher's words seemed to galvanize the townspeople. More stepped forward. Shopkeepers, farmers, miners, even some of Blackwood's own employees. The circle around the mayor and his men grew tighter. Morrison's nerve finally broke. His hand flashed toward his gun, but Sheriff Williams was faster. The lawman's bullet took Morrison in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his weapon flying into the dust. The other gunmen reached for their weapons but found themselves facing a dozen armed citizens. The odds had shifted dramatically, and they knew it. It's over, Marcus, Williams said, using the mayor's first name for the first time in years. Surrender now, and maybe you'll live to see trial. But Blackwood wasn't finished. With the desperate cunning of a cornered animal, he lunged toward Tommy, a hidden derringer appearing in his hand. If I'm going down, the boy comes with me. Cowman moved without thinking, throwing himself between Blackwood and Tommy. The derringer's shot echoed through the street, and Cowman felt the bullet tear through his shoulder, spinning him around but not dropping him. Before Blackwood could fire again, Tommy did something that shocked everyone. He pulled out a small pistol that had belonged to his adoptive father and pointed it at the mayor with steady hands. No more, the boy said quietly. You've hurt enough people. For a moment, the street was absolutely silent. Then Blackwood laughed, a sound devoid of warmth or sanity. You think you can pull that trigger, boy? You think you have it in you to kill your own father? Tommy's hands trembled, but his voice remained steady. You're not my father. You're just the man who gave me life. Samuel Hartwell was my father, and he taught me that sometimes good people have to stand up to evil. The boy's finger tightened on the trigger, but Cowman gently placed his uninjured hand over Tommy's. No, son, he said softly. You don't need that blood on your hands. Let the law handle this. Sheriff Williams stepped forward and placed Blackwood under arrest while Doc Holliday tended to both Cowman's shoulder and Morrison's wound. The other gunmen surrendered without further resistance, their loyalty to Blackwood evaporating along with his power. As dawn broke over Dustwood, the town looked different somehow, cleaner, as if a poison had been drawn from its veins. The documents from the Hartwell safe provided all the evidence needed to convict Blackwood and his associates. The silver mine would be returned to Tommy as Samuel Hartwell's legal heir, ensuring the boy's future. But more importantly, the people of Dustwood had rediscovered something they'd lost, the courage to stand up for what was right. 3 months later, Cowman sat on the porch of the rebuilt Hartwell ranch, watching Tommy play with a new puppy that Sarah had given him. The boy had grown stronger, both physically and emotionally, though the scars of his ordeal would always remain. You thinking of staying? Sarah asked, settling into the chair beside him. She'd been helping to care for Tommy while also organizing the town's new Democratic Council. Cowman flexed his healing shoulder and considered the question. For 43 years he'd been running from responsibility, from connection, from the possibility of caring too much about anything or anyone. But looking at Tommy, bright, brave, resilient Tommy, he realized that some things were worth the risk. Yeah, he said finally. I think I am. Sheriff Williams rode up to the house, dismounting, with the easy grace of a man who'd found his purpose again. Thought you'd want to know. Blackwood's trial is set for next month. The territorial judge says it's one of the most clear-cut cases of murder and corruption he's ever seen. Good, Cowman replied. And the mine? Operating under new management. Tommy's trustees, that would be you, Miss Sarah, and Doc Holliday, have decided to share the profits with the whole town. Seems the boy insisted on it. They all looked at Tommy, who was teaching his puppy to fetch. The child, who had been chained in a barn like an animal, was now ensuring that his good fortune would benefit everyone in Dustwood. He's got his mother's heart, Sarah said softly, and his father's, his real father's, sense of justice, Williams added. As the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Cowman reflected on how much had changed. A lonely cowboy had found a family. A frightened town had found its courage. A lost boy had found his way home. Tommy ran up to the porch, his puppy bounding beside him. Cowman, Miss Sarah says you're going to teach me to ride like a real cowboy. Is that true? Cowman smiled, something he'd been doing a lot more of lately. That's true, son. But first, you've got to promise me something. What? Promise me you'll always remember that being a real cowboy isn't about how fast you can draw or how tough you are. It's about standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard. Tommy nodded solemnly. I promise. And Cowman? Yeah? Thank you for saving me. Cowman pulled the boy close, feeling something he'd never experienced before. The deep, abiding peace that comes from knowing you found your place in the world. Thank you for saving me too, son, he whispered. In the distance, the lights of Dustwood twinkled like stars. No longer a town living in fear, but a community united by the knowledge that sometimes when good people stand together, justice really can prevail. The story of the loner cowboy and the chained boy had become legend, but more than that, it had become hope, proof that even in the darkest times, redemption is possible for those brave enough to reach for it. And in a small house on the edge of the desert, a man who had spent his life running finally stopped because he had found something worth staying for. A family, a purpose, and the chance to be the father he'd never had to a boy who deserved nothing less than the world. Hello, how are you? Did you enjoy the story? Like, share, comment on which city you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel to help us continue adding new amazing videos. Thank you very much, and come back often.